Welcome back to the Rethinking Podcast. In this episode, we talk with Anne Kervers. Anne is a PhD candidate who focuses her research on a new normative framework for corporate debt. Anne is fascinated by money and money creation. She explains how money is created and how her perspective on money has changed over time. We talk about growth, economic growth, and other ways to measure it. Next to that, we talk about protesting and how to protest in times of a pandemic. We discuss Extinction Rebellion NL, of which she is a rebel. Thank you for rethinking with us. Enjoy this episode. Hey Anne, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me. What have you been up to?
Lately I've been really enjoying the winter landscape and the birds because I put a lot of like peanuts and apples in my garden. So I've been constantly visited by blackbirds and robins, and it's been I really enjoy that. And hopefully ice skating in the coming days.
Ooh, I hope so. I mean, it's gonna be freaking cold, so it better.
Yeah. I probably tomorrow. I hope so.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, what are you excited about right now, next to the weather?
Okay. What am I excited about? Actually, what's coming up is the Spring Rebellion with Extinction Rebellion. So, because of Corona, we'll have an adjusted rebellion. Like previously, we would come all together and block a road, block a road basically. But that's not possible or like not responsible right now. So we're going to do rebellion of ones. So a lot of people are going to block a road by themselves. And this is something we do because walking marches hasn't proved to be successful in, in effective climate policy. And blocking a road is really annoying for the bystanders, but like having to wait or taking a diversion is less annoying than no food in 20 to 40 years, which is what we're currently heading up for. So this I am very excited about. Yeah, I think it will be 2 weeks until the kickoff. Yeah.
So, for those who don't know, what is the Spring Rebellion or the Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, so Extinction Rebellion is a climate movement. It was founded in the UK. And what's different about it is that it uses direct action or civil disobedience as a strategy. So no marching, like, walking where you're allowed to go, because what we've seen in the past is when you do that, the politicians say, yes, we agree, and then they go on. And what we do is economic disruption that forces that governments can't look away. And so we'll just continue to do this until they take action, because no action has been taken. There have been a lot of nice words, but carbon pollution still goes up. So this is basically what it boils down to.
So, who do you want to reach with this? Is it like a city thing? Is it a province, the whole country? What is the goal?
Yeah, so XR is a decentralized movement that exists all over the globe. And then and this is very important about it. So there is no chair, or there is no, there shouldn't be power concentration. And so you have a Dutch movement that consists of national actions twice a year. And then there's also local groups. And so the local groups take action also on their, for instance, city level. And then next to the local groups, you also have communities. So rebels. That's what we refer to each other, who come together on a specific topic. So, for instance, you have XR News Media, which is about journalism, and that there's no neutral position anymore because this is a climate crisis that affects us all. So there's no outside position. But there's also XR Fashion Action that focuses on, like the cheap mass clothing chains that exploit workers in other parts of the world. And there's also XR Landbouw that focuses on the role of farming as well, new ways of farming, as the role that farming plays in the climate crisis. So it's a huge crowd, and it is really, for me, it has been such an enriching experience. For instance, compared to more traditional institutions, it is organized very differently. So you really find the pros and cons of that, but it really enriches me to have this other toolkit and learning how to navigate how we work together in XR.
So how did you find this? How is it organized differently, and how does it then reach the people that it finds?
Yeah, so I was always involved in sustainability. How to say, like, I think thinking, because I didn't do so much from a young age. Mostly because I cared, about polar bears. So I never thought about climate change as if it would affect me personally. It was always for me about protecting animals because they couldn't speak for themselves. And so I was, I've been participating in many things, and then I also did a study on sustainability for my bachelor. And over time, you grow more hopeless because you know what is happening and that nothing is being done about it. And so I also felt very powerless. And then through The Guardian, I found this movement that grew so quickly. And through being arrested, because that's the aim. Like, you block a road. This is called civil disobedience, or in Dutch, burgerlijke ongehoorzaamheid. And it is justified because the government no longer protects you. So the government breaks the social contract. And therefore, it's sort of very important for democracy that you can critique your government in this way. And so what is important for civil disobedience is that it is strategic. So you should only cross the law, or like trespass, or I don't know the word, like you should only not abide the law in a very specific way. So it always still needs to be safe, for instance. And also there shouldn't be violence. It needs to be non-violent. And so when I heard about this group and I saw their huge successes in the UK, because after the first rebellion in the UK government declared a climate crisis. And then you can say that nothing really changed after that climate crisis. But for instance, when you think about it right now, our members of the cabinet, for instance, are sometimes, it seems like they're not taking the climate crisis seriously. And so if they have declared a climate crisis, and you can hold them account to that. So it's actually it's a very important step. And so when I saw how successful they were in getting things done and how it was a mass movement, I really thought, I want to contribute to this and join them.
Okay. So, but you say that you can get arrested for this and that is the goal. How
Yeah.
how is that then something that you're like, yeah, I'll join that?
Okay, well, I forgot her name, but there is this lawyer in the UK that also joined Extinction Rebellion. And she said, at this point in time, I spent my time more effectively getting arrested. Because what happens is when you get arrested, the police needs to take you in. There's a lot of paperwork involved. They often don't have enough cells because, you're arrested with, in the Netherlands, 300 people at the same time, which is a huge, fucks up the system hugely. That rarely happens, that 300 people are arrested in this sort of same morning in the same place. So, and then, your case goes to the court. So there's a lot of paperwork involved. So it's really costly to the government. So you really create this incentive for them to listen to you and listen to what you have to say. And I think getting arrested, it's funny that you ask like, if it involves being arrested, like why would you do that? And I think for me, it's not something that I do for fun. It's really out of despair and seeing no other option, or in a way, like this is sort of the next step from, walking marches, not being heard for years, politicians not listening to the science, and then if me giving up my time, because you're in the cell for like, I think I was there for, in total it was something like 10 hours, and you're in your cell for 6 hours. I was lucky I could bring my book. So it is a weird experience, but what I noticed is that the more you do it, the less scary it becomes. So the first time I was in the blockade, I was super tired at the end of the day because the police were coming on horses and they would go away, and your sort of adrenaline would go up and down. Oh, are they going to arrest me now? And will it be painful or not, etc., etc.? How will I be, by myself for 6 hours in the cell? What if, but then, for instance, in my last blockade, I just brought a book and I was reading, and I sort of was expecting, oh, now they're doing this, now they're doing that, this will take a long time. So and to be honest, I also got to know quite a few police men and women. So it sort of helps to recognize faces, it's also less scary. Yeah.
But with all that's going on and all the action and the movements that are there, why is nothing happening? What do you think is the reason that politicians or the government in general, why are they not listening to this?
I think there are, many reasons why not. But the one that I focus on in my work is money, and how the way we create money constrains our ability to finance sustainability transitions. So in a way, like because money creation is based on profitability, it becomes more, and also because it's a bit broader, and also because the sustainability transitions should be neutral according to the central bank, which means that they need to be efficient, which means that they need to be based on price signals. And this really slows down the transition. And I think this has a lot to do with the way we create money and what we think about, or like what are the political ideas behind monetary policy. So I think I would say that money plays a huge role in why politicians can't act.
So how did you get into this money topic?
So it started with this bachelor I did on sustainability. And in the first year, I learned that a lot of technologies are already available, but they just aren't financed. And then mostly because they weren't profitable. And it got me thinking, like, aren't they, the fact that they aren't profitable, does that say, we sort of tend to then look at the technology and think about how can we make the technology more profitable. But I was sort of looking at the context, like, why isn't it profitable? Maybe something is wrong in a different place. And so I studied economics, which was definitely a hard choice because it was not something that I thought I would like. I rather study earth sciences, for instance. But I felt that if I want to contribute to sustainability transitions, I think understanding money is very important. And so I did what they call a major in economics. So what I did is the second and the third year of the Bachelor of Economics. And it was indeed not fun at all. I only found out about rethinking economics after I graduated. But I still, because it was just founded after I graduated in the Netherlands, but still, finding out that there were other students that thought like me and had the same critiques was still a huge relief. Okay, but then from economics, I went on to work for a Triodos Bank. And there I learned more about money creation. And then from Triodos Bank, I went on to study cultural analysis. And that is more of a methodology than a field or a topic. It's not like economics, that it's sort of predefined what you're going to study. With cultural analysis, it's more, we teach you this methodology and then you can apply it to any field or any topic you want. And so then I deepened my knowledge of money creation and the political effects it has. And now I'm here.
So, okay, that brings up so many questions. Okay, so
Yeah.
You got into economics not because you wanted to study it, but because you felt you needed the skills then or the knowledge? Why did you get into it?
Because what I envisioned when I was, I think I was about 20, so 8 years ago, was really change from within. At that point in time, I really believed in transforming companies or other institutions from the inside. And I figured if executive boards will, if I want that they take me seriously, I need to understand their context. I need to understand how they, in their own ways, are constrained and to what extent those are, justified constraints, and to what extent those constraints are political choices. This is, and I thought if I study economics, then people in executive boards, or they will take me more seriously. And the funny thing is that the way I put it back then was, I need to understand money. But I wasn't thinking about money itself at all back then. But still, I put it that way. So I always find that a funny thing. So it was sort of double, but one was a bit subconscious.
So how did you think about money back then?
Back then, I definitely thought about money as just there as a neutral thing, something that is not important, that doesn't require further scrutiny, that has no role to play in combating global heating.
And how do you think about money now then? What changed?
So what changed is that I learned about money creation. So I always thought that money was just there. And then I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, and I said to him, yeah, but it's only the big banks that create money, right? Because we have this thing that says, know where your money goes. This was when I was working at Triodos. And also what I had learned during my bachelor in economics, that we convert savings into loans. And when I learned about money creation, for instance, I started to think about interest, and that maybe I should first explain money creation.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so just in case someone doesn't know how it works, it's a bit odd to be listening to this. Okay, so money creation is very simple. A commercial bank creates, when a commercial bank creates a loan, it adds the same amount to both sides of its balance. So that's all there is to it. And what the bank creates is called, or what a commercial bank creates is called bank deposits. And bank deposits are a claim on legal tender. And legal tender can only be created by the central bank. And it's maybe good to add that in 1694, the Bank of England was started. And it is a very important point in time, because that was for the first time that money was created privately. So before, money was created by the government. And now, because the actually Dutch king, Willem II, was so out of funds for his war against France, and couldn't raise taxes anymore, he was sort of dependent, or he was actually very dependent on these private investors that were willing to lend him the money on the condition that they were able to issue commercial paper. So it wasn't the system that we have today, but it was this very important switch point that I learned this from David Graeber in his book, Debt. So like this, there's this mirror thing happening that is very important. So also today, it's a bit different with us with the euro, because it's now at the European scale, but it's also that the government gives the ability to create money to the central bank, and then the central bank allows the commercial banks to create money, to create bank deposits, so a claim on legal tender when they make a loan. And let me see. The reason why, what changed is that I now think that money and money creation and monetary policy has a vital role to play in how we can combat global heating. And this is something that is often overlooked. When you read about climate policies, it almost never considers money itself. It's only that we need to use money differently or distribute money differently. And I think we also need to look at how we create money.
So money gets created whenever a person takes out a loan, or a company takes out a loan.
Yeah.
But then why is there money growth so when you take out a loan, new money gets created. And then okay, what is the problem then?
There are two, or there are always multiple answers to your question, but I'm going to touch on two. Um, so there are two things. First of all, when a bank creates a loan, there is they create what they call the face value of the loan. So the face value is the amount of money that you're going to lend. But what they don't create is the interest that you're required to pay them. So it's very weird. I realized the moment I realized this, and I was so puzzled, literally for 2 hours, sitting behind my desk by myself, that there is just never enough money in the world because the interest is never paid. So if you want to pay off your loan and interest, someone else needs to default. And for instance, now in our society, it is really difficult to default. Like even when you die, your debt is given to the next generation. So there is this tension that is growing. On the other hand, this is more of a textbook explanation of money creation and, the world of finance, how, with the shares going up and down, etc. There's also a lot of virtual money in the atmosphere.
Virtual money? What is that?
Well, no. So there's just, I shouldn't have said that. So what I was explaining about money creation by banks is sort of my point of departure. But the topic is much more complex. And so money creation also takes place in other ways that I am unfortunately not able to reproduce correctly right now. So I want to give it a try. But just to say that it's much messier than this. And that also explains what you were asking about the amount of money growing.
So there is never enough money to pay back all loans.
Yeah.
So does this create a specific pressure or a problem that keeps getting bigger that we maybe are not seeing, or that comes out in different ways?
Yeah, well, it creates the pressure for economic growth. So economic growth is the only way we can pay off our loans and interest without others defaulting. But then what is economic growth? Economic growth is the conversion of the natural world into capital. And we live on a finite planet. And we're now experiencing what it means to, continue to pursue this. Well, not really you and me, but people in other parts of the world. And so economic growth is not a strategy we can continue to pursue. And so I think it is super important to start a discussion on interest in our society, because this is not realistic to continue to do it like this.
So is there another option than economic growth? Is there another way?
To compare to what?
I don't know, maybe to measure how the economy is doing or how a country is doing?
Yes, this is actually what I wrote my bachelor thesis on. And a fun fact, I switched topics when I had already started. And then my supervisor said, oh, if you're going to do a qualitative research, because first I was going to do a quantitative. So this was in the economics department. Then the maximum grade that you can have is 7 or 7.5, because they value qualitative research so little. But yeah, there are many alternatives to GDP. So in Bhutan, they have the gross national happiness.
Okay, what's that?
Gross national happiness, yeah. So what they do is, well, okay, this is what I remember from my research 5 years ago. Or no, 7. So it's not super it won't be super spot on. But what I remember is that they have huge surveys that they ask their citizens to fill in, and it ranges all sorts of things, like, but like basically like, how happy are you with this? How happy are you with that? Like on social, in a social context, in an economic context, like, how you're doing food wise, all sorts of things. How's pollution in your area? And then they put this into, I think they still use a metric, not completely sure. Yeah, it's still a metric, so it's still quantified. And then I know you have the Human Development Index, you have the, what was the other one called? I mean, this has been a bit too long.
So why
but
are we so focused on GDP?
Hmm?
Why do we focus on this? Why do we focus on GDP only, or mostly focus on GDP?
The sad thing is that GDP was designed by Simon Kuznets, an American or Russian American, for
From
Roosevelt.
The Kuznets curve?
Yeah, same guy. He was screwed twice, actually, because there's also this huge story about the Kuznets curve, that it's that he also warned, like, no, you can't present it this way, and then they did, and other story. So so he presented it to the I guess the Senate, and he said, okay, this is a measure for President Roosevelt to see to to design successful policy that combats the crash and the economic crisis that was going on in the 30s. And he said it excludes a lot of very important things, for instance, women labor at home. So don't use it as an index for welfare or for well-being. Famous last words. And then they continued to develop it. And then after the Second World War, America or the United States were this very dominant player. And there was this thing where, I forgot this. There was this thing there where maybe because of all the loans they were making, they sort of wanted to have this comparison. Also has to do with the Bretton Woods Conference, to be able to compare these countries. What they thought was that World War II came out of economic misery. That was their theory. So we need to avoid economic misery, and we all need to grow. And then we need this measure to compare. We all need to use the same measure to compare how good or how well we're at this achieving our goal. So GDP was only implemented in the 1950s. So it's a relatively recent phenomena. And why I'm saying this is because I think, especially for me, growing up with GDP always being around everywhere, you sort of think that it's set in stone, but it's like the opposite. So I think we're hanging on to it because we need growth, because of the modernist frame we're in, that we sort of, everything needs to continue to get better, because otherwise we're lost in a way. And yeah, I think there are many rationalizations for why we need growth. It's also, people say, yeah, we need growth to be able to support the poor or something like that. But then, I don't agree with that. It's more about distribution than that we need more. I mean, if you see that, I think the 1% has 60% of all wealth. We definitely do not need more. We need to distribute better. Yeah.
It's interesting though that you say that there basically what you're saying is two different things. Like it could be better, and they say we need growth, but it doesn't mean that growth is by itself better. It's two different things that start to like get together as if they're one, except that
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
they're not.
Yeah,
And that's really interesting
yeah,
because there are so many different ways to measure how we're doing and how
yeah,
we could get better, and maybe money
yeah.
growth is not one of them. That's
No,
really
and yeah, this was really also how I got into um, like growth, and GDP was really my sort of first maybe realizing that the current dominant economic theories are not perfect. Because I remember I was always reading about growth, this growth, that, and then at some point I was reading a newspaper, and I realized, well, maybe growth isn't always that good. And I remember turning to older people and asking, like, shouldn't we look at growth more critical? And they were all like, no, no, no. And this was um, then Matthijs Bierman, the former director of the Dutch division of the Triodos Bank. He came to give a presentation to the first year students of Future Planet Studies. And I was in my second year already. But because I already had started economics as well. And because I thought, oh, well, but this is, where it all comes together for me, I went to the presentation anyway. And I asked him so many questions. And one of them was like, do you think that growth is always right? It's always a good thing. And he was the first person to me that said, no, not at all. So this was,
oh
so in that sense, it's and I'm happy to see that now so many bright people are working on this. And I think 2 years ago, I joined this conference in Brussels, where also in the EU Parliament, uh, even degrowth was discussed, which is, which was unthinkable. Yeah.
okay. So from Triodos Bank, how did you get? What are you doing with money now, and how did you get there?
Yeah. What am I doing with money? I'm spending a lot of money. No. A friend of mine visited me the other day, and he works in a completely different field. And he saw my bookshelf with all my books on money, and he thought that I was kind of greedy. But I explained to him that we never really talk about work. Then I explained to him that I, talk a lot about money, but I don't have that much money. But what I am doing now is looking at, so as I said, monetary policy, including money creation. So we, talk about monetary policy as if it's only setting this interest rate, but actually it includes a lot more.
Like what?
And like I would say it also includes the way we create money, sort of the laws and sort of conventions that currently exist. And so what is currently the case is that money is created by commercial banks who are profit driven. So there are some constraints to what they can finance. For instance, they're not allowed to finance terrorists. But apart from that, there are solvability ratios, liquidity ratios that they need to comply with. But there's that is to ensure financial stability. But there is not really an ethical review of how money creation now works. And I think we need to expand the framework that deals with how money creation works today, and that we also need to take into account ecological considerations and other effects, maybe on inequality, for instance.
So how would you do that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question that I ask myself a lot. I think an important aspect of it is that today central bankers really work with the premise that what they do is neutral. And I think it starts with that, like saying, no, your interventions have political consequences. So for instance, the QE policy of the central bank, of the ECB, has worsened inequality because it benefited richer people more than it benefited poorer people. And then I always find it important to stress that, for instance, I am very privileged, but I'm definitely not part of the elite. And I think this is a trap sometimes, that people think they're part of the elite where they're actually not. They're just a sort of very lucky and privileged, but it's not it's important to make this distinction, that I definitely did not benefit from the QE policy, and that is a very small group. So I think it starts with showing that these interventions have political consequences, and then assessing how these interventions are justified, and also how these justifications maybe can be expanded to also include climate and ecological considerations.
So what do you mean only a small portion of people benefited from quantitative easing?
Well, a small portion of people benefited more than other people.
Okay.
And it's a bit too easy to say it's the 1%, the 1% that owns 60% of the wealth, but it's probably also not that much, that far off. So it's just the asset owners whose assets, because the exchange market, or the stock market, I mean, is going up, whose assets are increasing. And it's, yeah.
So what is your research on now? What are you focusing on now?
Yeah, so now I focus on what adjustments can we make to the laws and conventions considering money creation that will help finance sustainability transitions.
Wait, you gotta repeat that.
Okay.
What?
So what are the, how do we need to adjust the laws and conventions considering money creation so that financing sustainability transitions becomes easier? Because now there is now there's negative incentive to finance sustainability transitions, because they're often not, as we said in the beginning, profitable. And then what needs to, can we lift up, for instance, the requirements that these transitions need to be profitable? Because what is the cost of not acting? What is the price that we pay if we don't change this? I think this is something that is often not stressed enough. But what we're looking at is, it is huge, but so many displaced people, so many deaths, extinction of so many species, and even according to there's even a risk of human extinction. And this is not me saying that. This is the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, also, for instance, the ECB member Frank Elderson wrote it in the preface of an NGFS report. So we now tend to look at and I think this needs to be much more part of the conversation. And it's also something that I really learned in XR, to tell the truth, because, I had studied sustainability studies. So I thought that I kind of knew how bad things were. And then when I started to read the science myself, so not follow the climate through, for instance, the publieke omroep, the NOS, I found out that things are a lot worse than I thought. And for instance, I was really shocked this autumn when I read that there is now a 95% chance of hunger in Europe in 20 to 40 years. Really hits me. I find myself thinking when I'm biking, how am I going to provide food? Should I maybe start practicing so that I'm skilled when the time is there, so that I know how to, it's not, first season and I didn't know the right techniques to put snails away, and now all my tomatoes are eaten, for instance, stuff like this. It had to do with, money creation being based on profitability, central bankers having this neutrality principle, and sort of not wanting to let go some of their, I would say, ideologies. So, for instance, when you look at the policy that they're now proposing, it's called a smooth transition, which means that they want so it means that private funds should be relocated so that finance, so that it's no longer profitable to be financing polluting activities. And they expect to do this through externalities, to pricing externalities.
Oh, like the true price concept that they're now working on, where they have all the externalities in the price.
Exactly, yeah. But something that is very particular about this is that it's a private transition based on profitability. And what it means is that the timing of the transition is in the hands of the asset owners. And the asset owners are usually not the people dying in Bangladesh from a flooding, or, the people having to flee in an insane amount of regions in the world because it's either too hot or there is or it's too dry to grow food. So it's super undemocratic to, like, why do these people have the right? Why is it justified that they set the pace for this transition? It's only because they're rich, which isn't fair at all. So this is a good example of a political choice that central bankers are making. So they say it's out of our hands. We have an efficient, smooth transition. But actually, it has huge political consequences, what they're doing. And a lot of species and people could be saved if we would have a different, quicker transition that, then maybe financial value would be lost. But right now, central bankers are sort of weighing what is worth more, humans or financial value. And then this is not something that you can, this is something that is very political, and also they're not democratically chosen. So it's also not a legitimate. It's also not up to what their mandate describes they can do.
So how do we change that?
Well, this is something that this is a question of governance, and it was not in my it was not so much in my how do you say, like on my radar before, but lately I've been thinking a lot about it, because what we have in Extinction Rebellion is three demands. The first demand is tell the truth, and the second demand is act now, and the third is citizens assembly. And I didn't know about the citizens assembly before, but it's a democratic tool that, for instance, was used for legalizing abortion in Ireland. And what it means is that there is this a group of people that are reflective of the whole society, that are informed by experts, and then make a choice. And so it got me thinking about, I always thought that, at some point I started to think that we need to update our democracy, because it's the same thing, you think it's set in stone, but actually our democracy is only 100 years old, in a way. So if you see how politicians are failing to make climate policy, I think a citizens assembly would be a huge, would also help them a lot, because then they weren't responsible for making these very, in a way, unpopular choices. But, from a precautionary principle, it is the only rational thing to do. And so what my research was focused on only before is coming up with sort of smart solutions. And then after I started to see that, there were already a lot of bright and smart ideas. And it is actually the same thing again. Now I realize only now with my Future Planets studies, then the smart ideas were also lying around already, but they weren't being implemented because they weren't profitable. And there is this similarity, like smart ideas aren't being implemented. And now I would say it is also because of the governance structure. So, and therefore I've been thinking about, maybe citizens assemblies for monetary policy, which in a way sounds really wild, but I think it could definitely work. And also because the people working at central banks are a very homogeneous group. If you look at the directors of central banks, like Christine Lagarde is now the only woman in the when they're having a meeting with all the directors of the central banks, because all the others are white men, and not only are they the same sex and color, they also probably enjoyed sort of the similar education. And I think it's, different situations mean different things to different people. Um, and therefore, I really believe that we need to diversify who is making that policy. And something that I always want to add to this is that the suicide rates surged in Portugal, Greece, Ireland as well, after the austerity was executed. And these are choices made by unelected people, bankers, that have huge consequences, but outside of their world. And I think all these worlds need to be in that room when such a decision is made, when it's being determined what is a crisis. Because a crisis to most people is very different to what they label as a crisis.
So is this then a problem of accountability, or that our jobs got so specific, so small, that we don't see the bigger picture anymore? Because you can't, I mean, I get it, but you can't blame a single person in the bank that's like, I'm just doing my job. I have to do it well or I
Yeah.
lose it. So how do you make
I
them
attended.
see?
Yeah, so I attended this meeting organized by Drift the other week, and there, one of the presenters said that he basically said he was also blindsided by the dogmas 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago. And now he started to see, oh, there are a lot of things that I didn't take into account. And I thought it was, it's sad because it has had a lot of consequences, like real world consequences for people. But I was also very happy to see that he acknowledged it and that he improved, like that he learned and got along, because also some people decide to just stay with it because they don't want to acknowledge they were wrong in the past. So I think how to make people see certain things, I think that is just about diversification, like making it a more inclusive meeting. Because it is, I don't think that you can tell these people what other people are going through and then they are going to alter their behavior. You know, yeah, this is I think it's just better to make it I think it is much more effective to make it a more inclusive practice and go from there. Yeah.
Well, I have another question that is very different from this, but you were at the very beginning or almost at the beginning of when Rethinking Netherlands started. And I would really like to hear how that started, how it was at the beginning, and how you've seen it change over the years.
So in the beginning, I think Joris and Lorenzo made this letter that really resonated with me. And so I immediately emailed them. A friend of mine, or like a mutual friend, sent it to me, and it really resonated with me. And I immediately wanted to be on board and start doing stuff. And then in the beginning, we had a lot of meetings. I remember at Lorenzo's place with, doing all sorts of boring things like making the foundation, going to the notary, working on a logo that I think we still being used today. That's a huge credit to Irene, who did a lot of work on that. And then it was sort of slowly started to grow. Then we would have national meeting with maybe 8 people. I remember when I lived in Rotterdam, we had it in the garden. It was really nice. And then we had these meetings at Utrecht, and then at some point it was like 8, maybe 10 people sort of showing up. And what I value most is what was really challenging for us is because we were all sort of concentrated in a single place. Like Joris was in Amsterdam, Lorenzo and I were both in Rotterdam. And then how were we going to make sure that it would also travel to other universities? And I am super glad to see how that sort of sorted itself out. And I am really impressed by how many things are happening, and I think this is just such an important thing to equip economists who are so influential in policy making, in politics, in that they are, that they have a better economic education than what is happening now. And I'm also happy to see that that the response from the faculties is a lot more welcoming now. Yeah.
So with every guest, we do a little lightning round. So I ask a question and you just say the first thing that comes up.
Yeah.
Okay. What is a skill any economist should learn?
be aware of distributive consequences. So how does a policy, or even well, no, let's stick to policy. How does it affect different people differently?
Who do you admire or look up to in economics?
Both Mazzucato and Rayworth.
What is a question you want me to ask that I haven't asked you yet?
Why do you like Mazzucato and Rayworth?
All right, we'll be the answer to that.
So what I really admire with both of them is how they are able to get their work implemented. So they have a different approach, I think, or from what I see, is that Mazzucato really works on a EU level, and is really, sort of setting the framework, or sort of guiding where things are going. And with Kate Rayward, it's a lot of cities now using the donut model. And even the White House, I think she worked for, or she gave a presentation. So that's definitely also, like on a huge level. And for me, that is really important, that my work can be implemented, is not too theoretical, that sort of connects with policymakers, so that we can make changes really quickly, because we have no time and we really need to reconsider money.
Where can people find you, or the things that you are most enthusiastic about if they want to learn more?
Okay, well, my website is called unmuting.money, and there's some things about me. It's not very up to date. And I also have a Twitter account, which is on a lage streepje, Kervers. I don't know what lage streepje is. And I can really recommend reading the report, The Green Swan by the BIS, because they really write down clearly what is at stake and how they think central banks should change.
So what is unmuting money?
Unmuting money, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a noise theorist. And noise theory is a field, and it sort of questions what is sound and what is sort of garbage, and makes that, in a way, it researches how those categories work. But I'm not a noise theorist, so someone else can explain it better. But there's someone really important in a field, and he's called McLuhan. And he has this theory where he says the medium is the message, which means that if we talk through the phone, or if I send you a letter, or if we Zoom, how we communicate, the medium that we use, always affects the message. And for instance, we would have had a different conversation if you would have sent me a question by mail, and I would have responded. And this is when I realized that money is also a medium. So money is just this thing that you and I use, this object that we expect others will accept as a means of payment in the future. But it can be a phone, it can be a postcard, it can be a Zoom, for instance. And then that basically sits in how it's created and how it's, governed. And that affects how the exchanges and the economic activity that it brings about. And so the idea is that to have a public conversation about the role that money plays, because now it's too often let out, and I think it needs to be part of the conversation. Yeah.
What do you want to say to future economists?
I think be aware that economics is not something that stands on its own. Like, we live in a world that sets conditions and it provides us with so many things. And then economic activity between humans is something that takes place within that realm. And always remember that your work is in that realm, and respect that.
So the final question, what does the future of economics look like according to you?
I hope it will have, how do you say, meer bescheiden. What's the translation for bescheiden? I think, yeah, modest maybe. I hope it will have a more modest place in giving shape to our societies. So that's maybe a bit of a weird answer, but money is now, and profitability are now such dominant measures, and I hope that that other measures of value will become more equal to that.
Thank you so much, Anne, for making the time
Thank
to
you.
talk with me.
Thank you for having me.